Before it ruled the Pacific, it was dismissed as a joke. Tiny, slow, fragile, its fabric wings rattled in the wind. Japanese officers called it the toy plane with a sting too small to matter. Even American sailors doubted it could hurt anything larger than a fishing boat. But soon, this toy would turn steel fortresses into floating graves. In 1938, the U.S. Navy demanded an aircraft that could carry a torpedo or dive bomb a target from 20,000 feet. Most designers said it was impossible. But at Douglas and Grumman, a handful of engineers ignored the laughter. They built two machines, the SBD Dauntless and the TBF Avenger, small, sturdy, and precise. Their purpose was simple: give pilots the power to sink giants. Before the toy plane, battleships ruled the oceans. Naval doctrine worshipped armor and guns, not wings. Admirals measured strength in inches of steel, not altitude. Then Pearl Harbor burned, and the world learned air power was the new artillery. The sea no longer belonged to ships. It belonged to whoever owned the sky above them. The Dauntless was never fast. It was dependable. Self-sealing tanks, dive brakes, and a bomb cradle that swung clear of the propeller. It looked fragile, but that fragility was deceptive. At 70 degrees nose down, it could aim a 1,000-pound bomb with surgical accuracy. Precision, not speed, would decide the Pacific. February 1942, Marshall Islands, U.S. carriers launched the Dauntless for its baptism of fire. The Japanese mocked the incoming dots on their radar until their ships erupted in flame. Every hit was a lesson, every miss an adjustment. The toy had drawn blood, and it would never stop. They called themselves dive bombers, but they were mathematicians of death. Angle, wind, altitude. Every second calculated while gravity screamed. Many blacked out during dives, waking only after releasing their bombs. They trusted their planes completely because trust was the only parachute that mattered. May 1942, the first carrier versus carrier battle in history. The Dauntless struck the Japanese carrier Shoho. One pilot radioed back, "Scratch one flat top." The phrase became legend. The droid had drawn its first ship-sized kill. June 4, 1942. 3 squadrons of SBD Dauntlesses found the Japanese fleet by accident, out of fuel and out of hope. In 6 minutes, they changed the war. Akagi, Kaga, saw you, hear you. 4 carriers destroyed. Japan's naval heart ripped out. The toy plane had sunk an empire's pride. Admirals watching through binoculars saw fire where steel had ruled. Battleships could no longer protect themselves from what they couldn't hit. From that day forward, the carrier, not the gunship, was king. The Dauntless had ended the age of iron. Every victory came at a price. Dive bombers attacked in daylight, alone, through walls of flak. They had no armor behind their backs, only sky. Survivors landed with bullet-riddled wings, blood-streaked goggles, and empty silence. They smiled anyway. Their toy had survived another run. As the Dauntless neared its limits, another toy took the stage. The TBF Avenger. Bigger, heavier, deadlier. It could carry torpedoes under its belly and fight its way home. Pilots called it the flying tank. The Japanese called it the Blue Death. At first, torpedoes were unreliable, duds that bounced off hulls. Then, engineers fixed the detonators, and suddenly, the ocean exploded. At Guadalcanal, Avengers crippled cruisers and supply ships alike. Each drop was a test of nerve, 200 feet above water, straight into flak. A heartbeat too late, and you died inside your own wake. While Japan hand-built Zeros, America built airplanes by the hour. Women riveters at Grumman worked 3 shifts a day. Every 55 minutes, a new Avenger rolled off the line. It wasn't just a plane. It was proof that industry could outfly ideology. By 1943, the toy plane carried radar, bomb sights, and cameras. It could find ships hidden by storms, then dive through the clouds to kill them. Technology turned courage into calculation. War was becoming mathematics, and the Dauntless was its proof of concept. June 1944, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. While Hellcats cleared the sky, Avengers stalked below. Their torpedoes tore through Japanese cruisers like glass. The once invincible Imperial Navy lost the core of its surface fleet in a single week. The toy had become a predator. As Japan turned desperation into suicide, the Avengers and Dauntlesses switched to defense. They became shield and sword, intercepting kamikazes before impact. It was no longer a duel. It was a race between courage and tragedy. And the toy planes still flew faster. On carrier decks, mechanics called it the buzz of hope. When Dauntlesses returned, decks erupted in cheers, because every landing meant a man had outflown death. That sound, the whine of retracting dive brakes, became the anthem of the Pacific. April 1945, the world's largest battleship sails toward Okinawa. The Yamato, 70,000 tons of pride. 300 Avengers and Helldivers attack. 17 bombs, 11 torpedoes, and the unsinkable Leviathan rolls, breaks, and vanishes beneath the sea. The age of battleships dies in a single afternoon. The Dauntless and Avenger had destroyed more enemy tonnage than any weapon in naval history. They were built from aluminum, plywood, and willpower, and they ended an empire. Every sunken hull was a tombstone carved by propellers. The toy plane had rewritten the laws of war. When peace returned, many Dauntlesses were scrapped or sold for pennies. A few survived in museums, oil-stained, bullet-scarred, immortal. Visitors stare at them, whispering how such small machines changed the world. And somewhere, beneath the Pacific, their victims still sleep. Because once upon a time, the world laughed at a toy plane, and the toy plane laughed last. By late 1942, Japanese sailors had a new superstition. They no longer feared submarines or shells. They feared the sudden shadow above the clouds. When a Dauntless began its dive, every man on deck froze. They called it the hammer from heaven. Once you heard the scream, it was already too late. Every dive bomb run was a choreography with death. The pilot throttled back, flipped open dive brakes, and pointed straight at the target. At 275 knots, the G-forces blurred vision. The bomb release had to be timed within seconds. Too late, and the pilot died in the explosion. Too early, and he missed. Those who mastered it called it controlled suicide. Those who didn't were never found. The Wright R-1820 engine gave the Dauntless its distinct growl, a deep, rolling thunder that echoed across carrier decks. Mechanics said they could identify every plane in the squadron by sound alone. When one didn't return, the silence was deafening. The engine wasn't just machinery, it was a pulse, and the fleet could feel it stop. Avenger crews flew low, so low they could see their reflections on the ocean. They dropped torpedoes within seconds of impact zones. Gunners faced direct flak, watching tracers stitch across the cockpit glass. If one engine sputtered, they knew it was over. But they flew anyway. For every ship they sank, 5 of their friends had vanished beneath the same sea. October 1942, Santa Cruz Islands. Dauntlesses and Avengers strike again. Japanese flag was so dense, it looked like storm clouds. Yet the toy planes broke through. They crippled Shokaku and Zuiho, the same carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor. The laughter from 1941 had turned into smoke and silence. Before satellites or radar networks, carriers relied on human eyes. Scout bombers launched at dawn, flying hundreds of miles with only a compass and faith. One wrong bearing meant eternity in the Pacific. Many never returned, but when they did, their coordinates could decide entire battles. They weren't just attackers. They were the ocean's scouts, the searchers of war. Japan fought back with everything it had: Zeeks, Kates, Veils. They swarmed the sky like hornets, protecting their fleets. But time betrayed them. The new American planes had armor. Japanese ones had paper. Every hit turned their fighters into fireballs. Courage was no longer enough when metal met mathematics. The toy planes' victories forced Japan to evolve. They built faster Zeros, heavier Ki-84s, even prototype jet interceptors. But they were chasing ghosts. For every new fighter Japan built, America built 1,000. And every one of them could launch from a moving city at sea. Industrial war had replaced heroism. Even the victors bled. Pilots returned with burns, shattered bones, and eyes scorched by sunlight from endless sea reflections. Some never spoke again. Others wrote journals that became scripture for future aviators. One note found in a wrecked Avenger read, "We're not toys. We're the hand that throws them." Those words became legend in flight schools for decades. Behind every flight was a crew nobody saw. Armorers loading bombs, sailors towing aircraft, engineers sleeping under wings. They worked in oil and salt, never seeing the horizon. Their reward wasn't medals, it was survival. They built the rhythm of victory one wrench at a time. By 1944, Japanese pilots could no longer fly without fear. Every time they took off, they looked for contrails, the sign that the toy planes were near. The Dauntless had become psychological warfare. It didn't just sink ships, it broke spirits. The Dauntless and Avenger were not perfect machines. Their strength was in being fixable. A field crew could replace a wing on deck using only rope and sweat. In war, simplicity beats sophistication. And the toy planes were simplicity turned into strategy. Each dive created a scene of apocalyptic beauty. Bombs whistled, air split. Ships vanished beneath plumes of black smoke. From the sky, pilots saw entire fleets crumble. And when the water calmed again, only oil slicks remained. It wasn't warfare, it was weather. America built smaller baby carriers to bring the toy planes closer to the front. They carried fewer planes, but more fear. Even a single dauntless squadron from these ships could devastate convoys. Japan's logistics collapsed under constant aerial ambushes. The Pacific had become a chessboard, and the toy plane was the queen. Every squadron had rituals, lucky scarves, pre-flight songs, even charms glued to dashboards. They joked to hide the terror. One pilot wrote his fiancée's name on every bomb he dropped. When he finally returned home, he married her with burned hands. She asked why he survived. He said, "Because the toy plane loved me back." At Grumman's Iron Works, engineers worked through nights, modifying designs based on pilot feedback. Every mission changed the blueprint. They widened wings, thickened armor, and simplified landing gear. Each improvement meant fewer funerals. That partnership between engineer and aviator became the soul of victory. Late 1944, the Formosa raids, Avengers and Dauntlesses launched from carriers stretching horizon to horizon. They crippled airfields, torpedoed transports, and isolated the Philippines. Japanese commanders radioed Tokyo. "We can no longer count our ships." The toy planes had turned empire into math, and math said 0. In 1945, many pilots flew their last sorties knowing the war was already won. They still dived, still dropped, still risked everything. Not for glory, but for those who didn't make it home. Each mission was a tribute, every explosion a salute. The toy plane had fulfilled its purpose. Now, it was time to land. Today, thousands of Dauntlesses and Avengers lie beneath the Pacific, their wings folded, their bombs still chained. Divers find them upright, as if waiting for orders. Nature has claimed them, coral wrapping around propellers like medals. They no longer fight, but they still stand guard. The Dauntless, the Avenger. Two toy planes that changed the definition of power. They sank battleships, carriers, and an empire's arrogance. They proved that courage could fly, and that simplicity could end supremacy. When the world mocked them, they answered with fire and precision. The sea once ruled humanity. Then the sky answered back. Their decks were airfields of vengeance. Each carried dozens of Dauntlesses and Avengers, their wings folded like sleeping predators. Where battleships fired shells, carriers fired men, and each man carried a bomb that could erase a city block. Power had found a new form, soft aluminum, not hard steel. In Tokyo, naval strategists realized too late that they had created their own destroyer. The same carrier doctrine that brought victory at Pearl Harbor had been perfected by the Americans. Now, the hunter was hunted. Reports of American toy planes sinking carriers shattered morale. Even Hirohito's advisors whispered, "We are losing the air. The sea will follow." The Dauntless wasn't fast enough to escape, nor sleek enough to intimidate. But it was built with one unmatched quality: balance. It could pull out of a vertical dive at 9 Gs without folding its wings. Its rivets, its flaps, its curved dive brakes, all worked in harmony. In the physics of destruction, balance beats beauty. The TBF Avenger became a floating bunker of death. With armor plating, rear gunners, and a massive payload, it could devastate convoys single-handedly. Future U.S. President George H.W. Bobbert. U.T.Y. Bush flew one. He was shot down, rescued, and returned to service. The Avenger didn't just carry torpedoes, it carried legends. At first, Japanese sailors feared torpedoes. Then, they feared bombs. Eventually, they feared silence, the empty sky before an attack. Because silence meant Dauntlesses were diving. And silence always ended in thunder. At Grumman and Douglas, factories became living organisms. Engines roared all night. Workers called themselves armorers of the wind. They weren't building toys. They were building extinction for empire. Each shift ended with a ritual, touching the plane's fuselage for luck. For many, that touch was the closest they ever came to combat. The Dauntless dive brakes were genius, perforated metal flaps that slowed descent without destabilizing flight. Pilots said they could feel the air scream through them. That sound became infamous among the Japanese, a banshee's wail that meant death was falling. Before each mission, pilots said a short prayer. "Let my aim be true, my dive be straight, and my pull-out be high." There were no atheists in a Dauntless cockpit, only believers in mathematics, luck, and steel. October 1944, the largest naval battle in history. Japanese battleships, cruisers, and carriers converged in desperation. The sky filled with Avengers and Dauntlesses. By sunset, Musashi, Zuikaku, and dozens of escorts lay beneath the waves. The Empire's navy had ceased to exist, all by the hands of toy planes. 3 years after the attack that started it all, American carriers sailed into Pearl Harbor again. Not in defeat, but in triumph. On their decks stood the machines that avenged every ship lost that day. Sailors lined the rails in silence. The circle was complete. The toys had grown teeth. Survivors spoke of dreams that never ended. The screams of engines, the black smoke, the sudden flash of ships splitting in half. Some never flew again. Others couldn't stop flying. Victory had a weight, and every pilot carried it home. The first dive bombers missed half their targets. By 1944, they missed none. Experience had turned statistics into precision. War wasn't luck anymore. It was training, repetition, and obsession. And that obsession sank empires. Each Avenger carried a third crewman, a radio man gunner. He navigated, spotted, and defended his pilots' blind spots. Many died before reaching the ocean. They were the unseen voices guiding the strikes. And when the sky went silent, their last words were often coordinates. Dauntlesses returned to carriers riddled with holes, flames licking their wings. Deck crews sprayed foam as pilots crawled out, coughing, half-conscious. And then, without pause, the planes were refueled, patched, and launched again. Victory was built on those few who landed burning and went right back up. By 1945, Japan's fleet was gone, its pilots nearly extinct. Young boys now flew kamikaze runs in outdated aircraft. Meanwhile, the Dauntless and Avenger flew with mathematical certainty. The empire had turned to faith. America had turned to production. And production never prays. It delivers. From their carriers, Avengers joined B-29s in firebombing Japan's industrial heart. Shipyards, oil depots, and factories became infernos. The weapons that once defended the seas now burned the cities that built them. The toy plane had come full circle. It was now the storm itself. Life below deck was another kind of combat. Heat, fumes, and noise so loud men bled from their ears. Every takeoff was a gamble, every landing a prayer. The heroes of the Pacific weren't only those who flew, but those who kept the toys flying. Captured pilots described their despair. One said, "Our shells hit them, but they did not die. Their planes were made of iron." Another whispered, "We fought gods made of smoke." To them, the toy planes weren't machines, they were fate. By war's end, the Pacific was littered with wreckage. Ships, planes, submarines, all resting beneath blue silence. Historians later called it the underwater museum of arrogance. Every rusting hull testified to the day the ocean surrendered to the sky. When peace came, the Dauntless and Avenger returned home. They were repainted, repurposed, or scrapped. But the men who flew them never forgot the feeling of the dive. That moment when time slowed and destiny fell. War ended. Gravity did not. Every modern navy, from Britain to Russia to China, owes its doctrine to those toy planes. The Dauntless and Avenger proved that air power decides oceans. Every carrier built since then carries their DNA. They were not just tools of war, they were the blueprint for the next century. In 2018, explorers found the wreck of the USS Lexington, still carrying several Dauntlesses. Their fuselages were intact, their markings bright. 8 decades later, the toy planes still waited in perfect silence, engines dreaming of home. Even the sea refused to erase them. Modern engineers still study the Dauntless, its structure, its balance, its forgiveness. It taught the world that complexity kills and simplicity wins. Every bolt told a lesson. Perfection isn't about adding, it's about removing what doesn't matter. When jets replaced propellers, the lessons of the toy planes remained. The F-4 Phantom, the A-6 Intruder, the F/A-18 Hornet, all inherited their spirit. Durable, versatile, loyal to their pilots. Technology changed, philosophy didn't. The Dauntless had written aviation's commandments in flame. After the war, the Navy used real combat footage from Dauntless and Avenger cameras to train new generations. Every dive, every torpedo run became classroom scripture. The instructor's motto was simple: learn from the toys that conquered the sea. Pilots say diving is addictive: the pull of gravity, the sound of wind, the flash of target. Some veterans returned to civilian life and became crop dusters, stunt pilots, or test aviators. They said they missed the fall. Only those who've seen the ocean rush up at 300 knots understand why. The toy plane became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of transformation. It showed that fragility can wield strength, and that size means nothing when guided by purpose. In every museum, children look at the Dauntless and smile. They see a toy, and they're right, because toys, in the right hands, can change the world. In 2023, one restored Dauntless took off over the Pacific once more. Its pilot was 94 years old, a veteran of Midway. As it climbed into the sunlight, he whispered, "This plane never stopped flying. The world just caught up." History saluted in silence. Above the Pacific, the clouds remember. Beneath them, the wrecks sleep. The Dauntless, the Avenger, and every pilot who proved that courage needs no size. Their story remains written in wind. They called it a toy plane. It sank battleships. And it never truly landed. The Dauntless didn't fight alone. It fought from wooden decks soaked in oil, sweat, and blood. Those decks, Yorktown, Enterprise, Hornet, were worlds unto themselves. Every takeoff was a heartbeat, every landing a resurrection. Decades later, divers found bullet holes still carved into the planks, silent scars from the planes that launched destiny. Every Dauntless and Avenger had its own accent. The creak of the control stick, the pitch of the engine, the whistle of the dive brakes. Pilots said you could hear when a plane was angry. Some even named them Lucky Lady, Devil's Doll, Pacific Widow. The names faded, but the sounds never did. War, for them, had a voice. After the war, captured Japanese officers studied Allied tactics. They admitted what they once mocked. One report read, "We underestimated the American machine. We fought bravery with emotion, and they fought emotion with design." Even their engineers confessed, "We built beauty. They built purpose." Purpose won. Not every Dauntless made it home. Thousands lied beneath coral reefs, their wings folded, their crews still inside. The ocean turned them into shrines. Fishes swim through shattered cockpits, unaware that they pass through history. Every wreck tells the same story, of men who fell and machines that refused to rise again. At war's end, Douglas engineers were asked to explain the Dauntless' secret. They replied simply, "It obeys physics, not pride." That sentence was later quoted at MIT lectures for decades. In it lay the philosophy that won the Pacific, that good engineering is humility turned into hardware. Before the Dauntless, the Navy thought ships won wars. After it, they learned that ideas do. Tactics manuals were rewritten. Every carrier pilot from then on studied the Dauntless doctrine: precision through descent, victory through simplicity. The toy plane had become a teacher. They worked without medals or headlines. Men who replaced engines in the dark, who patched bullet holes with tin, who refueled planes as bombs fell nearby. Without them, no hero took off. One mechanic said, "We fought the same war, only on our knees." History barely remembers them. The planes do. April 1945. Avengers faced the deadliest skies of the war. Hundreds of kamikazes swarming the fleet. Pilots had seconds to drop torpedoes and pull up through fire. They called it the day the sky burned. But even that storm broke against their discipline. The toys didn't flinch. Students of air warfare still studied the dauntless 70-degree dive. It was a perfect balance between gravity and control. Every second in descent multiplied accuracy, but also death risk. It was a literal equation. Courage divided by altitude. And somehow, they always solved for victory. To sailors on deck, battles sounded like symphonies. Bomb whines, machine gun bursts, anti-aircraft roars. The Dauntless was the violin of destruction, the Avenger, the percussion of annihilation. Together, they composed the soundtrack of the Pacific, a song written in explosions and silence. Engineers later calculated the stress a Dauntless endured in a 70-degree dive. Over 9 times gravity. That meant a 3,000-pound plane effectively weighed 27,000 pounds at pullout. Its rivets were designed to flex, not break. The Japanese thought it was fragile. Physics disagreed. The Rosies of Grumman and Douglas built over 10,000 of these planes. Mothers, sisters, daughters, working 16-hour shifts with oil-stained hands. They said they weren't soldiers, but without them, no battle would have taken place. When peace came, their tools were laid down, but their fingerprints stayed in every rivet that saved a pilot. America didn't just build planes, it built belief. Every assembly line echoed the same motto. He flies what we build. Each factory felt like a cathedral. The workers, its congregation. The toy plane became their offering to the gods of war. And it was accepted. The Dauntless didn't only fight in the Pacific. It hunted U-boats in the Atlantic, patrolled the Indian Ocean, even bombed North Africa. Everywhere it flew, it left the same message. You can't hide from simplicity. It was the world's first truly global weapon. Post-war documentaries often romanticize the jets and bombers, forgetting the Dauntless. But historians know better. Without it, Midway wouldn't have been a battle. It would have been a massacre. The toy plane never looked glamorous on film. It just looked effective. And that was enough. When the war ended, the first jet carriers appeared. Pilots said they missed the feel of propeller torque, the scent of fuel in open air. One said, "Jets win wars, propellers built them." The Dauntless was their last dance with the wind. Every modern strike aircraft, the A-10 Warthog, F-35 Lightning, even naval drones, carries echoes of the Dauntless. Target precision, structural redundancy, pilot survivability, all born from that toy. Its DNA lives on in algorithms now, but the soul remains analog. The Dauntless wasn't perfect. Many missions failed, many crews died. But its myth endures because it turned fragility into dominance. It taught humanity that invincibility isn't armor, it's purpose. That's why even wrecks still look proud. In 2015, the last living Dauntless gunner gave an interview. He said, "We didn't win because we were brave. We won because our machines forgave our mistakes." He passed away months later. His words became a plaque on a museum wall, right under a Dauntless wing. 80 years later, historians still debate the Pacific's turning point. Some say Midway. Some say Coral Sea. Some say Yamato's death. But the truth is simpler. It was the moment the world stopped laughing at a toy plane. Because that toy, built by hands of workers, flown by boys barely grown, ended empires, rewrote warfare, and proved once and for all that greatness doesn't roar. it dives.